Hello guys, today we are at another episode of Application for Econs, and today we are looking at another of your most feared micro topic, which is your firms and decision. Yeah, for firms and decision, the questions tend to be a little more difficult because the requirement is not very clear and the topic being very content heavy. A lot of students will struggle to determine what points to write and not sure what points to write. So for firms and decision questions, if you choose to do it in essay, you will have to spend some time to understand what the question is asking and then trying to come up with some concepts to link the points together. Understand that for a lot of students, you try not to do firms and decision essay questions because they are the most uncertain type of question that you might not know if you score marks. But recent years, A-levels, they are getting more and more creative. For example, for last year's A-level, they actually have hybrid question where they mix your firms and decision with market failure, firms and decision with price mechanism. So there are scenarios when it will be very difficult for you to avoid this question, even if this is not being chosen at the essay paper 2, right? You might still have to do it in your CSQ if it appears. So try not to spot topics because none of us have crystal ball to tell what's the future that the questions will come out is from where. So we try to understand and at least have a basic grasp of the various topics questions as much as possible. So here today we bring out a 15 mark essay question. So this is about the second part of the topic, which is your market structure. So I mentioned second part because there is actually a first part before your four market structure, which is also very important, such as your firm's goals, the various different revenue and cost curves, your EOS, DOS, and then your shutdown condition. So questions like that might also appear as a 10 mark part A, so don't miss those in your revision. But yeah, this question is a particular for the market structure one, and let's look at how we can analyze and come up with points, because actually once you grasp this type of question, how you can answer, they can become quite standard. It's just that the process of getting the points could be a little tedious, or sometimes you have to rely on some logic because it's not so clear and straightforward or set like your price mechanism or your market failure. Okay, let's take a look. So always look at the mark allocation closely because if it's a 15 mark, it always has evaluation. So let's look at how we apply our evaluation in questions like that. Okay, so as usual, look at the preamble first because the preamble tells you the context of this market. For example, they could tell you the market structure, what's happening, and they would likely want you to evaluate if this is a good decision. So they say that major private hire car service firms like Grab and Gojek are free to set their own fares. Okay, this is a little troubling because this means that these firms are free to set a high price because free means there is no cap by the government or restrictions to have their own fare. And we know that yes, for our car hailing services in Singapore, they tend to be quite expensive, at least 15 bucks to say up to 40 plus bucks at peak hour or even on rainy days. So I would say this market is regulated to a certain extent, but in terms of the prices, they don't regulate so much yet. Yeah, and because of that, because the prices are quite unaffordable, especially during certain hours, right? This calls for the government to increase competition. So first, before we even go to part B, which the question is, right, we need to understand why there is a call for government to increase competition. So increased competition means that currently we see that this market structure is likely a oligopoly because you have more than a firm, and these are major firms. So major firm also means that they have high market share. They are likely to capture many of the customer base, so maybe about say 80%, which is quite high. So you tell from the number of players, more than one, with each having a significant market share, this is likely a oligopoly structure. And when there is higher competition, usually it means that the government will allow more firms to enter. And when more firms enter, there are pros and cons. Firstly, these firms can provide some threats to this existing incumbent. So this incumbent may, for fear of losing customer to new entrants. So new entrants, usually how they work is that they charge a lower price because they want to capture a larger consumer base, right? Lower fare will attract more customers to them. So this major company, Grab and Gojek, they will usually try to do a price match, because if they don't match the prices of the new entrant, then they will likely lose their customer, because customers are enticed by price, right? Demand curve, lower the price, higher quantity demanded. So new competition can help to reduce prices in the market, and as well as motivate incumbents to be more innovative, because now they cannot be complacent. They know that with these new competitors, they need to back up. They cannot continue to set prices as they want. They cannot be lazy in innovation. They need to also compete with these new entrants through your non-pricing strategy. So pricing strategy, non-pricing strategy, this increased competition is likely to increase that. However, it doesn't mean that when there is higher competition, these new incumbents will always feel threatened, because they could be so good that the new entrants will still eventually die off, because we have learned from content that actually your incumbent can do price matching or even undercutting prices very well. So maybe the new entrant now per ride, they say, okay, I just charge $10. But these major firms, because they have been earning a lot of profit, super normal profit all along, so they could afford to lower their price as well to take some hit to their revenue. But this may then drive the new entrants out of the firm, because out of the market, because this incumbent can even price lower than them. So it really depends on how effective the competition is to pose a threat to the incumbent. So points like that you can include in your evaluation, because if you didn't include the various scenario where competition works, where competition doesn't work, then it doesn't count as an eval. So these are things that should be going through your mind before you even think of the answer, because the action word here for your eval is called discuss, right? The discuss the likely impact. So here, because this is also a Singapore context, so you need to, besides all this talking about the various scenario, you need to then include how likely the scenario is for Singapore. How likely is it for Singapore? So if you have the context of Singapore market for this car hailing service, of course it is good, because you can then talk about what you observe in the recent years when more entrants come in. Yeah. Okay, so we have sort of come up with a context of what we might be able to write, but let's look a little deeper at the question requirement. Okay, so the likely impact of higher competition on two party. One, your private hire firm, so the players themselves. So just now the points we talk about are about the players, and then its consumer. So there are two parties that you need to look at. One is the firms, one is the consumer. So your structure here should follow this. First, you tell the examiner why do you think competition is important. So in a way you show the examiner. Okay, let me use a different color. Number one, you show how competition plays a role. Because they say now they are worried about the higher prices, right, set by the incumbent. So show competition's role. Competition's role in terms of what? In terms of how it is being implemented. So how it would be, for example, the government relax the regulation of new entrants, because now maybe for a ride-hailing new entrant, the government make it easier for new firms to enter, less application process, less processing time, less cost to enter the market, or even the government can help to provide some subsidies to this firm. So you can talk about how it works, because this will add texture to your answer. You show the examiner you know what it means by increasing competition and how the government might do it. So you can talk about things like lowering barriers to entry, increasing subsidy for new firms, relax some regulations. Because you need to show how the government plays a role in this, right? Not just, given that competition is now higher, cannot. You need to talk about how the government enables it, why they think that it is important. So this is meant to lower prices for the market, because the problem is the prices are too high. So the competition is meant to lower prices for the consumers, because the consumers are the ones that are being hit by the higher prices. But besides that, the question will also want you to see the impact on the firms and consumer, right? So actually, we can also think of how firms will be impacted, because the firms will have the two types, right? Now you have the incumbent and you have the new entrants. So we learned in our part 1 that what firms really care about are just a few things. So first, if they are going for profit maximization, how will this impact their profits? So profits for both the entrants and the incumbent, and also their market share, because actually market share is also an indicator of their consumer base, which then affects their profit, because the higher the market share, it means the more consumers they have, the higher the revenue, and more likely the higher the profit. So in terms of firms, they can be impacted in this way. So when the question asks you what is the likely impact, right, then you have to talk about, do you think the profit is increased or decreased? Do you think that the market share is increased or decreased? So you have to argue for that later, which in this case, you know the various outcome, right? So in order to have this outcome, you need to talk about the various scenario that could happen. So at this point, we are still structuring the answer. We have not yet really talked about the point. Later on, we will string them together. So that's why for firms and decision question, you need to plan quite a lot before you write, because there are so many things that you can write. And if you don't plan and you just write, your answer will sound very messy, out of structure, and likely might not have answered the question. Okay, so in terms of for the consumer, just remember these 3 points. Consumers are impacted in these 3 ways. Firstly, the price, because to them the price of the service matters. Second is the quality. And then the variety. These are the 3 most common ways that consumers are going to be impacted. So again, with the introduction of the competition into the market, is the price likely to increase? Why? Decrease? Why? Quality, is it likely to increase? Why? Is it likely to decrease? Why? And variety. In this case, variety, it should increase lah, because now you have more choices. So maybe the consumers will want to have a different experience riding with, say, Gojek versus a new entrant. So at the end of the answer, you should be able to conclude for firms what happens to their profit, market share. Then for consumer, price, quality, and variety. And you paint the scenario which if A happens, then they are impacted this way. If B happens, then they are impacted that way. And your conclusion should then tell the examiner which scenario do you think that is likely to happen. Because in this case, usually the Singapore government is quite efficient, right? So if they were to increase competition in the economy, it likely will work lah. So here, let's talk about using these points, we talk about what are the two possible scenarios that could happen. I mentioned two because we don't have too many such that it is very confusing for yourself and the examiner. So keep it simple. Keep it simple but sharp. Okay, so scenario 1. So scenario meaning what do you think may happen? Is the competition likely to increase? Is the new entrants likely to survive and compete with the incumbent, for example? Okay, so scenario 1, we say it's a success. So success means that the new entrants increase and pose a significant threat to incumbent. Because actually when you have more competition and it works, right, it is a good thing overall lah. So before you write, you need to talk about why the higher price is an issue and stuff to the consumer. Okay, so if this is a success, there are a few things that may happen. So first, the market share for each firm now will be redistributed. So actually the market share per firm, the average market share decrease, because last time when the incumbent are the two, right, maybe each of them share say 45% out of 100. Okay, maybe each of them 45% because we assume that they capture about 80-90% of the market. So you can assume that maybe now it was 90 divided by 2, about 45. But with the introduction of the new firm, it is now say 2 firms enter, so now divide by 4. So this part, you reduce market share, it also means that as a firm, you have less power to set prices, less power to set higher prices, to be specific, to set high prices. Because if each firm, now you know that including the incumbent, I have less consumer base because it has been snatched away by my competitors, the new entrants, right? I wouldn't dare to set so high prices because I would just lose more customers. So now, in terms of the prices, it is a good thing for the consumer. However, it might be a bad thing for the firm on their profit. Because if you have less market share, it also means that you have less revenue. Okay, so what happened now is less revenue. Because now the firms cannot sell to as many consumer and there is lower prices. So it is a minus for the incumbent. Okay lah, minus for the incumbent plus for the entrant, because the entrant, if they didn't enter the market, it was 0, right? But now they enter and they get some revenue. So you can be specific to say the lesser revenue is likely for the incumbents. And for the consumer is good because they have lower price and higher variety. Higher variety because of more players in the market. They got more companies that they can consider. Okay, so variety. Okay, let's look at quality, because quality here, it depends, because quality to consumer would mean the quality of the services, right? So the quality of the services would depend on whether the firms are innovative to bring higher quality services to the customer, or even use things like technology to make the riding experience better. Maybe now it's even easier to book a car, or it is the application interface is more user friendly. So it depends how you want to write, because in scenario 1 we say that when it is successful, it sort of implies that actually the incumbent are not that strong. That's why when the new entrants enter, then they can easily take some power away from the incumbent. However, this in terms of the quality here, we can say it increased to some extent lah, because of new entrants. So here we can keep some stuff constant, like the incumbent didn't really compete in terms of quality. That's why they lose out. The quality increased because of new entrants. They bring in innovation. So you talk about how this can happen. So maybe better application. So here I would say if scenario 1 happens, then it is overall to the consumer a good thing, because we see that the price has lowered. The quality has increased a little bit, and then the variety has increased, but it sort of hurts the firm, especially the incumbent. So this is how you can conclude the impact, because we have talked about the two party and then the impact. Then to the new entrant, it is good for them because they earn some revenue by entering the market successfully. So talk about these things. So as you have structured at the top what you want to portray in terms of the impact to what, right? Then you can include that in your various scenario. Okay, so scenario 1 is as such. Let's look at our scenario 2. So scenario 2, it will be the opposite. It will be failure. So failure means the entrance maybe the entrance entered because of the help from the government, but they didn't survive. Because this is quite common as well, where if the firms, the incumbent are so strong, right, it's very hard for new entrants to compete on same footing. And some even if the market is very aggressive, the incumbent has a lot of tricks to drive the competition out, right? Then this entrant will die very quickly, and they didn't manage to have any impact to the market. So if this happens, the entrant didn't survive, in a way all these things is business as usual, right? What is currently happening? Because now the incumbent didn't feel like they are being threatened. So this one, the market share is the same. So your market share is the same. Then in terms of the prices, it might also still be the same, because now no competition, same thing, right? Variety wise, no change, because your new entrant maybe come in 3 months, 6 months, they got driven out. And then the quality. Okay, the quality, this one is up to debate lah. We can say it is the same because the incumbent didn't feel motivated to innovate to stay competitive, right? But maybe some they can sort of get triggered by this government's move, because they know that now the government has their eyes on them, right? The government knows that if they are being very anti-competitive, then they will introduce competition in, and they don't know when an entrant could actually compete against them. So now maybe fail, but maybe next time, what if you have a US-based entrant, China-based entrant who are very good at technology, all this online services, transaction stuff. So when they come in, then although these incumbents are now very strong, but in the future, they may meet stronger competitors. So I think if you want to go a few steps deeper, you can even say maybe this move by the government, right, actually sort of motivated the incumbent to do something now, in terms of, okay, maybe they review their prices. So because if they behave very good, they are not being very competitive, right, the government won't touch them. So they may be motivated to change something. Maybe they decrease the prices a little bit, maybe they increase the quality a little bit enough such that the government don't bother them. So I say that actually for scenario both 1 and 2, the consumer still stands to benefit, because if scenario 1 happen, then good, successful. If scenario 2 happens, then although the entrant didn't get to compete successfully, but there may still trigger some changes in the market. So you can lay out these 2 possible scenario, and then lastly, your conclusion. What scenario do you think is likely to happen? Because actually, if you stop your answer here, I think it is good enough, because we need to take into account time management and stuff, right? So sometimes when we do evaluation question, in a way, we don't really need to aim for perfection, because we don't have enough time for that. But make sure that you at least get an A for your answer if you are aiming for A. In this case, I think if you can write this, you already can get, say, at least a 11 to 12 mark. It is just that the last part which you conclude, it will definitely add marks, but if you don't have time, right, you can skip that. So in this case, I will do a very quick conclusion. I will say, in the context of Singapore, which scenario do I think is likely to happen? So I will say scenario 1, because firstly, the government has a lot of control over businesses in the market, because Singapore is a very small country. So the government has very tight control of how businesses work in the market. So if they were to introduce competition, it is likely successful. And already, if you learn in macro context, right, you know that Singapore already is facing inflation, so the government is even more committed to make certain services affordable. So I think we can pull out these points, what is currently happening, to justify why you think this will happen. Lower inflation, so the government also has control over market. Yep. And in Singapore, I would say the business sentiments are also quite open. So new entrants are likely to receive a lot of support as well, because the Singapore is very pro-enterprise, right? Meaning that when new businesses come in and the government sees that there's a value add to the market, they are welcome the business. So all the more, with all this help and the commitment by the government, these firms might be able to have higher chance to survive. Yeah. Control over market. Then another point that I will write here in black, it's a little messy, is pro-enterprise. So these businesses will get support. New business. Okay, little lack of space. Yeah, so the conclusion can be a quick one to say which one you think will happen. And this further adds on the eval part. Yeah, so if you know how increased competition works, what's the problem, and then what are the impact to who, look at what parameter and what scenario is likely to happen and stuff, right? Actually, this is quite a fixed structure. It's just that you see that we spend quite some time on that. Yeah, but if you are comfortable with how this can be done, right, then this is actually quite okay. Yeah, let me minimize so you can see the whole picture. So the planning that we have here is quite intense. But of course, I think when you do the planning, you just stop at the green font. Then all the points that you want to write, you can think about it as you write. Yeah. Okay, so here is a 15 mark one. The previous video, we talk about the 10 mark one, which is on part 1 of your firms and decision market structure question. So yeah, take a look at them, and hopefully this gives you more confidence to do questions like that. Yeah. Okay, so we have come to an end, and then can stay tuned for our next video. I'm thinking of increasing the topics about macro because our videos so far are all about micro econs. So this is very helpful if you are a J1 studying, revising, preparing for a promo, or for a year 2 who are revising for your micro, which is also very important. But we might branch into a macro in the next few weeks lah, given that final exam is coming. But we are likely to start with globalization because this micro topic is also one of the more challenging ones for students. Yeah, so stay tuned and we will see you at the next video. Bye.